Good afternoon, school. Can you please stand quietly? We stand here today on Kaurna land. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the country that we meet on today and recognise their continuing connection to the land, waters and culture. We pay our respect to elders past and present. Can you please remain standing as Miss Gould and the Vocal Jazz Ensemble perform the National Anthem?
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are one and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is girt by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. History's page, let every stage of vast Australia fair. With joyful strains and let us sing, advance Australia fair. Beneath our radiant Southern Cross, we'll toil with hearts and hands to make this Commonwealth of ours renowned of all the lands. For those who come across the seas with boundless place to share, with courage let us all combine to advance Australia fair. With joyful strains and let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Good afternoon, school community. Please be seated. Our Anzac Day commemoration connects us with our past, our history, connects us with our nation, Australia, and connects us with those who have given time and lives in service. So we come with this prayer. God of all people in all times and all places, we gather to remember the common life we share, our community, our history, our nationhood. And although we have not lived the events we recall this day, we are each shaped by the courage, the giving, the sacrifice and the suffering behind their stories. So we pay our respects in gratitude and hold them before God in faith, in the hope of everlasting peace. Through Christ we offer our prayer. Amen.
The poem A Tribute to Anzac Day by Ken Bunker depicts some of the locations Anzac soldiers were all too familiar with. With their hair a little whiter, their step not quite so sure, still they march on proudly as they did the year before. Theirs were the hands that saved us, their courage showed the way, their lives they laid down for us that we may live today. From Gallipoli's rugged hillsides to the sands of Alamein, on rolling seas and in the skies, those memories will remain. Of airmen and their sailors, of Lone Pine and Suvla Bay, the boys of the Dardanelles are remembered on this day. They fought their way through jungles, their blood-soaked desert sands. They still remember comrades who rest in foreign lands. They remember the siege of Old Tobruk, the mud of the Kokoda Trail, some paying the supreme sacrifice with courage that did not fail. To the icy land of Korea, the steamy jungles of Vietnam, and the heroic battle of Kap Yong and the epic victory at Long Tan. Fathers, sons, and brothers, together they fought and died, that we may live in peace together, while at home their mothers cried. When that final bugle calls them to cross that great divide, those comrades will be waiting when they reach the other side.
Before dawn on the 25th of April 1915, the first soldiers of the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps landed on the shores of the Gallipoli Peninsula. The men were part of a British and French-led invasion. The Allies' mission was to destroy Turkish guns that were preventing naval ships from reaching and bombarding the Turkish capital, Constantinople. If they succeeded, Turkey might be forced out of the war and Germany would lose an important ally. Some 2,000 Australians were killed or wounded on the 25th of April. It was a day of confusion and fear. One soldier called it a day of sorrow, as he remembered the dead and wounded. At Anzac Cove, the Australians were the first to land. The New Zealanders followed later in the day. They advanced about a mile in some places, less in others, but they could go no further. For the next 8 months, the campaign was a stalemate. In December, the Anzacs were evacuated. By then, about 8,700 Australians and almost 2,700 New Zealanders had been killed. There were some of at least 130,000 soldiers on both sides who lost their lives at Gallipoli.
Anzac Day has been one of the most important dates on Australia's calendar since 1916. At first, it gave people a chance to honour the original Anzacs, the Australians and New Zealanders who fought on Gallipoli. Then it became a day for those who had served in the First World War, with Australians experiencing the Second World War and wars, conflicts and peacekeeping operations that have followed. Anzac Day has become an occasion to honour all that have worn our country's uniform in service. Today we reflect on that service. We recognise more than 100,000 Australian servicemen and women who have lost their lives in military operations carried out in our country's name. We honour the values that have been invested in the original Anzacs: loyalty, selflessness, courage, and in the ways in which later generations have measured their own achievements against those of the soldiers who fought on Gallipoli.
We would now like to welcome Troy Radbone from Westminster's class of 1995. Warrant Officer Troy Radbone enlisted into the Australian Army in March of 1998 and was allocated to the Royal Australian Army Ordnance Corps. During his service, Warrant Officer Radbone has undertaken numerous postings, including infantry, artillery, helicopter and logistics units, as well as the Army's headquarters and training establishments. He has served on numerous deployments, with the most recent being South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of the Congo in East Africa with the United Nations. Warrant Officer Radbone is currently posted to the 1st Armoured Tank Regiment as a regiment's chief.
Every nation remembers some past event, some battle, or some defining moment in history. Our defining moment came in 1915 at Gallipoli. The events of the first Anzac Day were an unbreakable and permanent foundation of our nation. Anzac Day is more than a national holiday, but rather a fundamental Australian tradition. On Anzac Day, we salute not only the spirit of Anzacs, but in paying tribute to them, we take the opportunity to dedicate ourselves to striving for our country as they did and upholding their finest qualities of courage, commitment, endurance and mateship. The young men of Gallipoli were the first Anzacs, ordinary young Australians doing their best for the campaign of enduring a campaign of intense ferocity. Their casualties were horrendous. Nearly 6,000 Australians were killed and 78,000 wounded, and to what end? Their campaign was a failure. And yet, of all the battlefields of which Australians have died, it is this disastrous campaign that has come to symbolise the Australians' soldiers' courage, determination and fighting prowess. The essence of Gallipoli was the fact that in the face of adversity and potential defeat, the Australian spirit triumphed. Gallipoli was not the only battle of the Great War, and at the conclusion of the war, 250,000 Australians from our small nation of only 5 million at the time had been casualties, and 60,000 had been killed, as a tragic average of 1 person in every 17 in a population were either dead or wounded as a result. The pride and grief of Australia following Gallipoli formed a bond so strong that it made the statement to the world that we had become of age and that our army and our people were truly of one nation. By coming together on the April 25th each year the spirit of national unity is rekindled. It requires us to reflect on the past with pride, but also to look ahead and to build on the achievements of our predecessors. By displaying the characteristics of the Anzac spirit, we can enrich our Australian traditions. We meet today not to celebrate or glorify war, but to rather remember those who have served our country during conflict and crisis. History shows that for a peace-loving people, when stirred into action, we Australians are a formidable adversary and remarkably skillful at the business of war. On every occasion the Australians have been called upon to protect freedom, they have done so generously, efficiently, and effectively. We have the need of the qualities of Anzac still, and we should continue to draw on them, for they can only make our community better and our nation more confident. Let us remember the Anzacs. The Anzac spirit exists in all of us, so therefore, let us be guided by the Anzac spirit in facing the nation and personal challenges ahead, and let us strive to be worthy of the memory of those we honour today.
We now begin the official acknowledgement of Anzac Day by symbolically laying the wreath. These were traditionally laid on graves or memorials to commemorate the dead and wounded. It is a way to show respect. Red poppies are associated with World War I, but also serve to remember the wounded and show our support for the families. The laying of the wreath will be followed by the ode of remembrance, the bugle, and a minute of silence. Please be upstanding and remain silent while our school captain, Ava Bonner, and our special guest, Warrant Officer Class 2, Troy Radbone, lay wreaths of remembrance.
We will now hear the Ode of Remembrance. At the end, we hear the words, "Lest we forget," to which we all repeat the words, "Lest we forget." This is our commitment to remember and acknowledge all those who have served for us. Following the Ode, the last post will be played. At the conclusion of the last post, we'll have a minute of silence to remember all those who have served Australia. At the end of that minute, you'll hear the rouse. Following the conclusion of the rouse, we ask you that you do not clap. They went with song to the battle, they were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall not grow old as we that are left to grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them, lest we forget.
You may now be seated. Anzac Day is an extraordinary, important day of remembrance for those who made the greatest sacrifice in the name of their countries. We would like to conclude today with this moving excerpt. What these men did, nothing can alter now. The good and the bad, the greatness and smallness of their story will stand. Whatever of glory it contains, nothing now can lessen. It rises, as it will always rise, above the myths of ages, a monument to great-hearted men and for their nation, a possession forever. That brings us to a close for today's moving Anzac Day ceremony. I'd like to thank you all for your participation. I'd also like to thank very much Warrant Officer Troy Radbone, an old scholar of Westminster, for taking time out of his day to come here and give us a great insight into some thoughts around Anzac Day. So appreciate your time here, Troy. Please put your hands together. Also, a particular mention to Miss Kay and our readers today that went for a lot of effort to produce such a fantastic a ceremony here today. So thank you to those that were involved and our speakers as well.